Who are these people?
So our boy Biden, finding enough that this is not getting enough information. Remember how he was like anti-fracking and then he was?
Yes.
Well, well, his administration quietly approves a huge Texas oil export project. So, this is comes from the Texas Tribune, written by Dylan Badur, where he says the Seaport Oil Terminal would be 30 miles off the Texas coast and is one of four proposed offshore terminals designed to dramatically expand the U.S. oil import capacity. So, buddy.
Money.
So, oh, there we go.
There it goes.
The Biden administration has approved plans to build the nation's largest oil export terminal off the Gulf Coast of Texas, which will add 2 million barrels per day to U.S. oil export capacity. The approval by the Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration was filed in the Federal Register on Monday without any public announcement, a day after the United Nations annual climate conference wrapped up in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. So that was the COP conference that you talked about 2 weeks ago. Earthworks, an environmental nonprofit, spotted the filing and publicized approval of the Seaport Oil Terminal on Tuesday. President Biden cannot lead on combating climate change, protecting public health, or advocating for environmental justice, while simultaneously allowing fossil fuel companies to lock in decades of fossil fuel extraction, the group's senior policy advocate Kelsey Crane said in a statement. In its 94-page decision, the Maritime Administration wrote, the construction and operation of the port is in the national interest because the project will benefit employment, economic growth, and U.S. energy infrastructure resilience and security. The port will provide a reliable source of crude oil to U.S. allies in the event of market disruption. The administration's move marked a major step forward for the export sector, which has grown rapidly since the U.S. began to allow crude sales abroad in 2015, the same year that the U.S. helped broker the Paris Climate Accord that called for dramatic reductions in global fossil fuel emissions. The offshore oil export terminal, the first to be approved of four proposed along Texas's Gulf Coast, will enable continued growth in the U.S. shale oil production and in global consumption, leading a substantial step back to the White House goals for drastically cuts in carbon emissions by year 2030. President Biden has renewed United States leadership in the fight against climate change, the White House said ahead of the UN National Climate Conference in Egypt this month. The president is delivering on his day one promises, positioning the United States to achieve our ambitious climate goals. In July, the Maritime Administration 890-page impact statement said oil process at the Seaport Oil Terminal will create greenhouse gas emissions equal to 233 million tons of carbon dioxide per year, about 4% total 2020 U.S. emissions. Approval of Seaport Oil Terminal off the coast of Freeport, about 50 miles south of Galveston, gave its corporate developers, Enterprise and Enbridge, a clear lead in the race to build the first new offshore export terminal in the Gulf. It was the agency's first endorsement and followed a 3-year review process. According to James Coleman, who teaches energy law at Southern Methodist University in Texas, the exports terminal approval represents hands-off approach the Biden administration has adopted towards oil infrastructure projects since winning the White House on promises to block pipeline expansions. So I guess instead of pipelines, we're going to get our oil from the ocean instead. I guess. Anyway.
What kind of ocean drilling again? What's that ocean drilling he's talking about wanting to do? Especially in the Gulf? What's that he's trying to repeal? The deep water stuff? Is that what what I heard?
Yeah.
So the stuff on the stuff that South Park literally had BP apologize for. We're talking about that. We're talking about that stuff, like the Deepwater Horizon shit. Again, we've seen this movie. It's called The Deep. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh God. Like, the 90s movies need to stop, like, ruining our lives. Right? Yeah. Anyway, you have more, right?
Yeah, I do. They keep asking the oil industry to expand its production and build more refineries, and yet they are saying we need to phase out fossil fuels, Coleman said. What they said seems contradictory. You think?
Yeah.
The Environment Protection Agency issued its approval on the project last month, also without a public announcement, prompting Gulf coal activists to stage a protest in Washington, D.C. that ended in 4 arrests last week. I actually did not know that. I'm extremely disappointed, said Melanie Oldman, founder of Citizens for Clean Air and Clean Water in Brazoria County, where the project is proposed. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and President Biden have chosen not to be climate change leaders. The EPA has not responded to repeated requests for comment. While its October 7th endorsement of the new terminal outlined concerns over climate change and environmental justice, it did not explain why the agency opted to approve this project. Last week, they were in Egypt telling the world that now is the time for climate action. This week, they're locking us into a climate wrecking monstrosity for at least a generation, said Jeffrey Jabicki, Deputy Director of Texas Campaign for the Environment. According to the Maritime Administration, the project will expand a Houston area terminal opened by Enterprise and connected to a new 140-acre offshore facility near Freeport with 4.8 billion barrels of storage capacity. From there, 2 36-inch underwater pipelines will run to the new deepwater port, 30 miles offshore, where 2 24-inch floating crude hoses will load it onto the ocean's largest class of crude tankers. At least 14 giant pumps with a combined output of 86,000 horsepower will be needed to move the oil from Houston to Freeport and then out to the offshore terminal. The project will create 62 permanent jobs plus up to 1,400 temporary construction jobs, according to the Maritime Administration. The project aims to improve the efficiency of oil exports from the Texas coast, where small tankers currently ferry oil from coastal depots to larger ships that wait in deeper water miles offshore. It will process more oil than the largest U.S. export terminal currently operating, Motor Ingleside Crude Export Terminal, owned by Enbridge in Texas, which moves up to 1.6 million barrels per day at the port of Corpus Christi, the nation's top port for oil exports. Compared to facilities and processes used today, this project will create a safer, more efficient mechanism for exporting oil and play a key role in facilitating U.S. energy security, a Maritime Administration spokesperson said in a statement. The administration's decision to lay out a series of final steps for the Seaport Oil Terminal to receive a license and begin construction. Plans to develop the offshore section date to the lifting of the oil export ban in December 2015, said Jordan Bloom, editorial director at Hart Energy in Houston. But efforts lost momentum in 2020 when the COVID pandemic caused global oil demand to dip. Now that demand has rolled back and prices are soaring, actually I have something to say about that, development of the export sector is pushing forward. The Maritime Administration's approval gives the Seaport Oil Terminal a clear lead amongst other projects. There was essentially this big race to build these, Bloom said. Not all of these projects are going to be built, so being the first mover is really important. The Seaport Terminal hopes to start operations by the end of 2025. When it does, Bloom says it will initially draw business from less efficient offshore terminals in Houston and Corpus Christi. Over time, it will enable growth in oil production from Texas shale oil fields and beyond. It will allow for increase in production to continue. It would encourage more production, but it wouldn't be a light switch, Bloom said. Thoughts? I actually have a couple, but I want to see what you're thinking.
I mean, classic, don't pay attention to, lefty politicians doing what Republican politicians would do. It's like classic one of these situations where Biden has a public position and a private position, and the private position is getting done. So,
yeah. Also, I just think the timing of this. Go ahead.
Well, also sending all of that sending all that then pressure for climate change onto the bottom rung of society, essentially, and we have to deal with its consequences, right, zombie viruses,
right,
and oh god. Anyway,
but I have another thought, which, and again, this is going to be speculation, but I feel like the timing of this seems kind of, well, maybe not sus, but it seems kind of convenient given what's happening in Europe in terms of Russia and the lack of oil resources coming into Europe right now. I just feel like and there have been reports that Europe is basically looking at the US now and basically being like, what the fuck are you doing? So, I just feel like this is a way to, again, speculation, but I'm speculating that this is the US's way to kind of be, well, I wouldn't even necessarily say be on good terms with Europe, but to kind of, basically give the middle finger to Russia, but then being able to potentially sell oil to Europe at, who knows how high, depending how long this proxy war with Ukraine lasts, but potentially giving Europe the means to have this oil, but at, an offer that at that point, depending how long it goes, that they can't refuse, so I just feel like, to me, this just kind of seems, I think, especially given what's happening globally right now, this just seems kind of nefarious I think climate change aside, but I think just the idea of being like, hey, we got some oil, Europe, you want some, but not necessarily being good actors and kind of saying and how much they're willing to sell it for. That's just what I'm thinking, and I may be off the mark, but that's where my mind really went to in terms of hearing about this and then just kind of knowing what's happening in Europe right now. So.
Yep. No, couldn't agree more.
As Rick says, capitalists going to capitalize. So yeah, I think, this is just our way. Again, this is profiting, big oil, obviously, but I think then just the opportunity for us to export it. And then, I think especially I'm thinking Europe off the bat, just giving them, obviously they're going to need it, because the pipeline from Russia has been destroyed. So now this is kind of America's way of saying, we can give you oil, but we can give it to you for how much we want because you need it and you don't have a choice but to take it from us. So I feel like this is kind of again, kind of the way of kind of saying, suck it to Russia. But I don't feel necessarily they're going to be necessarily working with good faith with Europe either, or at least the potential is there for them to do that. So, we'll see, because like I said, the article said this export terminal is not going to be open until 2025. But given what's going to happen we don't know how long this proxy war of Ukraine is going to be, be something to kind of watch closely in terms of, the effect of how, what they plan to do with this oil as far as trade. So
yeah,
worthwhile watching, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I mean, fucking Biden, man,
overall, and we didn't talk about it because, obviously, everything just went down today, but no one can say shit about Biden anymore. The people will, but, again, this story wasn't reported on. This kind of went under the radar. But, other than that, he he fucked over the railroad workers. The squad went to bat, you know, like essentially saying, you know, like the railroad workers can't strike, you know, like, and I said this in a tweet. That's scary to think about, you know, that our government basically has the hand to be like, you cannot fucking strike, you know, like that is scary to think about that. And if they're able to do that in the railroad industry, there's no telling like what other industries might kind of take them up on it, that they can do it in other industries as well. So people should be worried about that, you know, in terms of what just happened today. So, but I also feel like with that, I think the workers made the mistake of kind of announcing when they were going to do it. You know, like don't give away your cards, essentially. Like don't announce when you're going to strike. I feel that was one of the biggest mistakes that they did. Was like we knew that we knew of like when they were going to plan to strike, so they had time to rally and kind of do this shit. So, you know,
and they're funding police more than ever.
Right. So, you know, so people who go to protest, you know, it's going to be similar to what we saw, if not worse than what we saw, even not January 6th because there was no security, but like George
Standing
Floyd
Rock. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, I think that's it for us tonight.
Ed is saying strikes are illegal. Do it anyway. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, yeah. What are you gonna do? It's literally the only thing you can do.
Strike or quit.
Strike or quit. Striking.
Yeah. Fine.
Yes.
You know, like leave your job.
Tell other people not to show up. That's called a strike.
Right.
Like that's
right.
We're just not going to call it. So this isn't a strike. I don't know what you mean.
Right.
This is an open air concert that we are having. Like, just, you know, like no, we having a block party, man. We got like block party things. Like we closed off the street. It's fine. Slip a couple of fucking, you know, sheriffs of some $100 bills, you know, like you'll be fine.